Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be diving deep into Leviticus today, specifically those first few chapters on offerings.
Okay.
It might not sound like the most exciting topic, but
Right.
stick with us because there's so much to uncover here.
Yeah.
We're looking at a chapter from MCS Leviticus, The Calling, which offers like a Christian perspective on this part of the Old Testament.
It hurts to say.
So we're going to unpack what these ancient rituals can tell us about faith and sacrifice and connecting with God today.
That's cool. I think it's fascinating how those things from so long ago
Right.
can still be relevant, you know?
Totally. And the chapter really digs into how Leviticus is this guide
Yeah.
to holy living for God's people.
Mm.
And even the Hebrew title Vayikra,
Okay.
which means, and he called, kind of points to that idea that God's inviting us into something deeper.
Yeah.
It's not just rules, but a whole way of life.
It's about aligning yourself with God's character.
Right.
Striving for holiness. And that's where the offerings come in.
I see.
The chapter focuses on the burnt offering,
Mm.
which is the first of 5 offerings described in Leviticus.
Got it. So let's get into the specifics of this burnt offering then.
Okay.
What did it actually involve?
Well, you had to bring a male animal without any defects
Okay.
from either your herd or your flock.
Interesting. So why a perfect animal? What was the point of that?
Well, the chapter stresses the symbolism there.
Okay.
The animal represents the dear Son of God,
Mm.
given willingly. And just like the animal had to be without blemish,
Yeah.
it points to Jesus' perfection and sinlessness.
Wow, that's a powerful connection.
Right.
So the offering itself had to be voluntary.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was about someone actively seeking a connection with God,
Yeah.
recognizing their need for forgiveness.
You can picture someone bringing their offering to the tabernacle
Yeah.
right into God's presence.
Powerful imagery.
It is. And then there's this detail about laying hands on the animal.
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious, what did that mean for the Israelites?
It was this really personal act
Okay.
of confessing their sin,
Huh.
almost like transferring it onto the animal.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah, and then, of course, the animal were killed,
Right.
and its blood sprinkled on the altar.
A stark reminder that sin has a price.
Definitely. The blood symbolized life being poured out for atonement.
Mm-hmm. And then they burn the whole animal, right?
Yes. Completely burned.
Symbolizing.
Total dedication to God.
It's all very
Intense.
intense. Yeah. The chapter also says the smell of the offering
Yes.
was pleasing to God.
Uh-huh.
That's a kind of strange detail, isn't it?
It's symbolic. You know, like when you bake cookies
Okay.
and the smell fills the house?
Yeah,
It creates this welcoming atmosphere.
I get it.
Maybe that's how God sees our acts of service and devotion.
That's a really cool way to think about it.
Yeah.
So we're seeing how all these pieces of this ritual
Right.
have this deeper meaning pointing to something bigger.
Exactly. And it's amazing how many parallels we find
About
for
the-
Jesus' life and sacrifice.
Yeah. You know, it just struck me how the laying on of hands is
Mm.
almost like foreshadowing how we personally accept Jesus today.
Oh, totally. It's not just history.
Right.
It's about a personal choice we make.
And that connection comes up again and again
Yeah.
in Jesus' willingness to be the sacrifice.
Right. He wasn't forced. He chose to give himself up.
What an incredible act of love.
And think about how the offering gave people a way to approach God.
Yeah.
Jesus becomes that bridge between us and the divine.
It's mind-blowing when you really think about it.
It is. And just like the offering had to be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was perfect and sinless.
And that's what makes his sacrifice so powerful.
Exactly. It makes him the ultimate offering.
The chapter also mentions how the animal being completely burned
Yeah.
symbolized complete devotion to God.
And we see that mirrored in Jesus' surrender to God's will,
It really makes you consider what surrender looks like in our own lives.
doesn't it? And that's something we can explore further as we
Okay.
keep going.
It makes you wonder, though, did everyone have access to these offerings back then?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's actually addressed in the chapter.
Okay.
It talks about how the type of animal you offered,
Mm-hmm.
a bull,
Yeah.
a sheep or goat, or even a bird,
Okay.
depended on your economic status.
So like a sliding scale based on what people could afford.
Yeah, exactly. And the chapter emphasizes that God valued all offerings equally.
Really?
It wasn't about the cost,
Mm.
but the sincerity of the heart.
That's amazing. It means that no one was excluded
Right.
from connecting with God.
It really levels the playing field.
Yeah, and speaks to God's grace.
Absolutely.
It's like that saying, it's the thought that counts.
Exactly. God was more concerned with the heart than the size of the offering.
So even the poorest person could offer a bird
Right.
and still have that connection with God.
A beautiful reminder that our relationship with God isn't about our wealth or status.
It's about humility and surrender.
Exactly.
The chapter does mention, though, that with the bird offering, the priest killed the bird, not the person bringing it. Why was that?
I think that was mainly for practical reasons.
Okay.
Birds have a lot less blood than larger animals.
Oh, right.
So the priest had to make sure it was drained properly.
Just like a technical thing.
Yeah. And the chapter also says they removed the bird's food pouch.
The what?
The food pouch or crop.
Okay.
It's where birds store undigested food.
Interesting.
And since birds eat all sorts of things,
Right.
some of which might be considered unclean,
I see.
they had to remove that part to maintain the purity of the offering.
So even in these little details, we see this focus on purity.
Yeah, it makes you think.
It does.
What are the impurities we bring to God today?
Right.
And how can we strive for that purity of heart?
It connects back to that symbolism of the perfect animal.
You're right. It all points to this idea of being without blemish.
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, that's where Jesus comes in.
Exactly.
It's amazing how these seemingly separate threads all connect to Jesus.
It really highlights how the Old and New Testaments are connected.
So let's bring it back to those parallels we talked about.
Okay.
Between the offering and Jesus' sacrifice.
So remember how the animal had to be offered willingly?
Yeah.
Jesus didn't resist his fate.
Right.
He willingly gave himself up.
Out of love.
Exactly. And just like the offering provided a way to approach God, Jesus becomes that bridge between us and the divine.
Opening up a path to God's forgiveness.
Right. And of course, we talked about the perfection of the offering.
Yeah.
Just like the animal had to be without defect. Jesus was perfect and sinless.
Making his sacrifice so powerful.
Exactly. He's the perfect offering.
And then there's the laying on of hands, that personal act of confession.
Yeah.
It foreshadows how we personally accept Jesus.
It's not just an event in the past.
Right.
It requires a response from us.
And the animal's death atoned for sin.
Yes.
So Jesus' death on the cross becomes the ultimate sacrifice.
It's a powerful image of God's love for us.
Definitely. And the burning of the animal symbolized total dedication.
Right.
And that reflects Jesus' complete surrender to God's will.
Wow, so many parallels.
Like a mirror for our own lives.
So we talked about how God values the heart behind the offering more than the size or cost.
Right.
So how does that apply to us today? What does a burnt offering look like now?
That's a great question.
We don't bring animals to an altar anymore.
Right, but the principle still applies.
Okay.
It's about surrendering what we hold dear to God.
So instead of animals, what are we offering?
It can be our time, our talents, our resources.
Our lives, even.
Yeah, it's recognizing that everything belongs to God.
And choosing to use it for him.
Exactly. It's about generosity.
Giving without expecting anything back.
And sometimes the most meaningful offerings are the ones that cost us something.
The ones that push us out of our comfort zone.
Yeah, and in those acts of surrender, we experience growth and joy.
And a deeper connection with God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not about checking off a box. Right.
But about a deeper relationship with God.
Through love and surrender.
You got it.
It's amazing how these ancient lessons are still relevant.
They really are.
Leviticus is pretty amazing, isn't it? We've learned so much about faith and sacrifice.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's all about connecting with God, too.
Right. And speaking of connecting with God, remember that question from MCS Leviticus, the calling?
Oh, yeah, the one about the symbolic burnt offering.
It asks, if you were to offer a symbolic burnt offering today, what aspect of yourself would you be willing to completely consecrate to God?
That's a powerful question.
It really makes you think, what are we holding back from God?
Yeah. It could be a bit uncomfortable.
Totally. Because surrender means letting go.
Right. Letting go of control.
Plans.
Trusting that God's ways are better.
Even when we don't understand.
Exactly. It's a journey, you know?
It is.
Like a continual offering.
And as we surrender, we make space for God to work.
It's in that offering that we find true holiness.
Living a life set apart for God.
We become living sacrifices.
Using everything we have to serve God and others.
Bringing hope and healing to the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
I
want you to really think about that question.
What are you holding on to?
What needs to be surrendered?
It could be anything.
A relationship, a fear, a dream.
Anything that's holding you back.
Bring it to God and ask for help letting go.
You don't have to be perfect.
Right. It's about progress.
Taking small steps.
Letting God transform you.
And you'll find freedom and joy.
It's been an incredible journey exploring this with you.
I agree.
Until next time, keep diving deep.